looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. So lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's special live stream. Very topical subject, that's for sure. But first, the thirst for information as a result of big tech censorship has become quite apparent with last night's live stream on a range of topics relating to how the fourth industrial revolution, touted by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, will impact your lives personally. This live stream has gone viral across the internet. Now, I'm going to show you something which is highly disturbing when it comes to censorship. Look at this. YouTube are now advising channels that the suggestion that prayer is a remedy for the virus is medical misinformation and earns you a community strike. Can you believe that? Anyway, that's what's going on. For those who missed last night's live stream, please go to lovinglifetv.com and look in the videos for the title, which is right near the top, Blowing the Lid Off the COVID, etc., etc. I'm not going to say any more here. Tonight we have Yusuf Ismail back. Yusuf is a regular commentator on Loving Life. We will be discussing the fall of Afghanistan into the hands of the Taliban and what the implications are for the global security situation. A military offensive by the Taliban and allied militant groups against the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and its allies began on the 1st of May 2021, coinciding with the withdrawal of most United States and allied forces from Afghanistan, including those from Australia. In the first 3 months of the offensive, the Taliban made significant advances in the countryside, increasing the number of districts it controlled from 73 to 223. On the 6th of August, the Taliban launched an assault on the provincial capitals of Afghanistan, with most of the towns surrendering without a fight, and they captured all provincial capitals except Bazarak. On the 15th of August, the incumbent president, Ashraf Ghani, fled the country and the Taliban captured the Afghan capital, Kabul. Thus, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan government fell. Watch how the people of Kabul, in desperation, fled to the airport to escape the Taliban. I'm sure you will agree. Quite tragic what's going on in that country right now. I just don't even want to think about it. Please remember to subscribe to Loving Life on YouTube to be kept informed, and also lovinglifetv.com, the platform we are transitioning to. And believe me, the registrations on lovinglifetv.com are just exploding, and that's fantastic because we are becoming the most widespread news source for South Africa on the internet anywhere through lovinglifetv.com. Okay, if you have a question for Yusuf, please put it in the side chat. I'll get Yusuf on. Here we go. Hi, Yusuf.
Hello, how are you, Scotty?
Excellent, buddy, excellent. How are you?
It's good, it's good. I see we are waiting in anticipation in terms of what's going to happen on Monday in South Africa.
Yes,
on
we
the
are.
23rd of August. I see you've covered that.
In fact,
we'll see what the outcome is.
Just on that subject, Yusuf, I've got General Isaac van Zyl from Boerelichian joining me tomorrow night to discuss specifically what is going to be done to, I guess, to fight back against any insurrection that happens in South Africa on the 23rd. Right, now, talking about insurrection, wow. Now, following 9/11, the US stormed Afghanistan to remove the Taliban and other hostile groups to prevent further serious terrorist events. This followed failed attempts by Russia to tame the country. Please give us a bit of the history of the attempts by the superpowers to cleanse it of groups like the Taliban and why it failed, or why they failed.
Well, Afghanistan as a country, as a nation, as a region, has been called, not surprisingly, the graveyard of empires. You've heard this repeatedly being mentioned in different parts by different journalists, reporters, and of course political analysts. And it's not surprisingly that almost every single empire, the present manifestation is a US empire that basically has entered this particular region, has left like a beaten dog with a tail between its legs. And what we've seen, how is it possible? The question we need to ask is, how is it possible after fighting the longest war in its history? For years we've been speaking about the Vietnam War as being the longest war in history. A few years back, the question was being asked, or the statement was being put forth, that the US, in fact, stood at the brink of total defeat in Afghanistan. And right now, what we see is essentially, you've had for the past 20 years, or at least 18 years after the 2003 invasion, a proxy government that was in place. $1 trillion, you're talking about $1 trillion was spent on military operations, 100,000 troops, 100 to 200,000 troops at a particular time. And the United States government had trained an army of about 350,000 Afghans as their allies. And within a minute of seconds, within a month, as soon as the United States left, the entire infrastructure that they had set up over the past 20 years has basically collapsed into total oblivion. And what lesson this teaches us is that in the American failure lies basically a paradox, because Washington, or the so-called Washington Consensus, massive military juggernaut, has basically been stopped in its steel tracks by this particular ragtag group of villagers and people that have just come and walked in. There's been no fight. I mean, you saw the images of Ashraf Ghani, and I think you made the point that he was running away with like a coward with wealth and cash and leaving to, I believe, Uzbekistan. And within a matter of minutes, a couple of days, the entire nation and the entire infrastructure essentially collapses. And the point being made at the end of the day is that in relation to that, the invasion of Afghanistan in 2003 was a total mistake. It was a disaster. Spending and wasting 20 years in Afghanistan was a total mistake and a total disaster.
Trillions
wasting
of dollars.
the lives of their own soldiers. Yeah, billions of dollars. I think on the army alone,
I believe it was $2 trillion.
Yeah, $1 trillion on military operations, but there was a separate figure also for the army itself. And of course, not only the United States military, but also the Afghan army. I mean, they spend, and all the infrastructure, all that weaponry, some of it latest weaponry is now basically in the hands of the Taliban. They control, I was reading a report which says that the Taliban now have, in fact, more weaponry at its disposal than Australia, than your country, which is absolutely remarkable in terms of what is going on and the shocking state of affairs in terms of what we see here. So concluding on that particular point, invading Afghanistan was a mistake. Spending 20 years in Afghanistan was a total mistake and a disaster. And leaving Afghanistan in this particular fashion would have been what was in fact a total failure and a total disaster.
You know what?
The point being made, Scott.
Yeah, carry on.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, you know what
the point being made, Scott, is that.
Carry on.
What do you think?
Carry on, Yusuf. Okay, you carry on.
Yeah, what I was saying is that what we see happening it was in fact inevitable. This is inevitable based, of course, on the meetings that were held last year, prior to this whole COVID-19 coming and taking over the world, the Doha Agreement, the agreement of bringing peace to Afghanistan. I mean, that was an agreement signed between the United States and the Taliban at the Sheraton Hotel in Doha in Qatar. It's a 4-page agreement. You can read it on U.S. State Department's website. And the provisions of that particular deal, in fact, include the withdrawal of all American, all NATO troops from Afghanistan in return for a pledge by the Taliban to, in fact, prevent Al-Qaeda from operating in areas under Taliban control. Now, the point being made is, why would you enter? The United States would never enter into an agreement of peace with a group or a particular country that is in a state of weakness. It could have only have entered into this agreement if it knew the inevitable, that once it leaves, a year later, the government, the so-called proxy government it sets up, has left. And that's essentially what basically happened, because they agreed to the reduction of the force level, I think, from about 13,000 to 8,000 in July 2020. And that was going to be followed by a withdrawal within 14 months. And just as the United States withdrew, the Taliban came back into power. It's like, you couldn't make this up, basically.
Yeah.
They closed all their 5 military bases within 135 days. That deal, in fact, which was signed in Doha in 2020, was backed by China, it was backed by Russia, it was backed by Pakistan, and it was unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council. Although it did not, strangely enough, it did not include the government of Afghanistan. People don't know. India, in fact, strangely enough, welcomed the pact's acceptance by the Afghan government people and the people, so-called, strangely enough. But I think the writing was on the wall back then that this was the inevitability. And essentially, what you see here is it's like going back to grade 1. But there may be a silver lining on the wall, because what you can see at the outset is that this so-called new generation of Taliban appear to be at least talking about egalitarianism. Now, whether that is going to be implemented over the next couple of months, I mean, they're speaking about having equal rights for men and women, equal rights in terms of education and all of that. That's all well and good. And if they live up by that, then certainly the will of the Afghan people will obviously be fulfilled in that regards. But that's still left to be seen.
Yeah. Now,
I believe that there may be possibly an evolution in terms of what we see pertaining to the Taliban now, or they're still conservative, compared to the Taliban in 1996 to 2001. This is a totally different generation. And so it's left to be seen what the outcome is in relation to what the future is going to hold.
Okay, now I just have to say what I've seen on television does not augur well for what you've just said about this new generation of Taliban. I've seen a horrific video of a lady being executed in the streets of Kabul. I don't know if you've seen that, but I would
I've
just
seen that. In fact,
hang on. I would just make one point regarding what's happened in Afghanistan, and that is that it's the power of the people. You know what? I know how terrible the Taliban are, but can you imagine if people around the world stood up to their governments like this terrorist force has? And I'm not saying with arms and but as a group, as a collective, the people just got up and said, we're over this bullshit. We're not buying into the Great Reset. We are getting the heck rid of you because we want our old way back. We don't want lockdowns. We don't want to wear masks. We don't buy all this stuff. You know, that's a message I see from this with what happened in Afghanistan. If people peacefully basically just rose as a collective and said, enough's enough, that would stop everything in its tracks. And
yeah, most certainly. Definitely in terms of, by the way, I did see about an hour ago, and I posted it on a forum in terms of which I moderate, the Open Debate Forum, which is a forum on a WhatsApp group. And the report I think you're talking about is from Sky News Australia, which reports a particular woman being shot. I need more confirmation of that particular report. If it is indeed true that that is happening here, then it's simply business as usual. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least, but it would certainly disappoint me because it would go against and diametrically oppose what this particular group and its leadership in fact claimed, whereby they suggested that there was going to be no curtailing of the rights of civil liberties on condition that it basically does not break down the mores of their own particular society. If that is indeed the case, it may possibly be an aberration. I don't know. It may possibly be a foretaste of something to come. But I think, you know, from what I can see, besides that specific report that is on Sky News, and I've seen it on the Australian channel, if this is systematic and it in fact continues, then it would be deeply disturbing for the Afghan population. At the end of the day, I think what we need, what people would need, is the will of the Afghan people. And in any nation, you made this particular point that standing up to establishment, standing up to power in whatever form or manifestation that it basically permeates itself in different parts of the world. If people get together, and if this is an analogy of people power, you know, you speak about standing up against the idea of mandatory vaccinations, standing up against the idea of, compulsory maskings at all costs, standing up against some of the ridiculous regulations. If people power and people come, in fact, together, then certainly that would bode for a better future. But the point being made is that at the end of the day, when you replace the establishment, you shouldn't replace them with something which is inherently more tyrannical. And so the Afghan situation is a bit of a kind of a paradox. You know, it was, maybe we'll go into a bit of the history, but it was during the Cold War that the United States first intervened in Afghanistan, and they backed these group of individuals who were fighting to expel the Soviet Red Army. And then, of course, in December 1979, the Soviets occupied Kabul in order to shore up their particular failing earlier regime. But I think what people don't know, and one of the journalists who was in Afghanistan in 2003, who's now Australian, John Pilger, made the telling point that, Afghanistan's was at least, and still is, a tragedy. And it, in fact, is a tragedy that exemplifies the maxim of Western power, and that is that third world countries, any third world country for that particular matter, are essentially regarded as expendable and dealt with strictly in terms of their usefulness to us as empire, in a manner of speaking. And you find that ruthlessness, Scott, that hypocrisy is in fact imprinted on Afghanistan's modern history. One of the most closely guarded secrets, which John Polger and people like Noam Chomsky and Robert Fisk point out, is that that one of the secrets of the Cold War, according to the official view of history, was that the CIA support to the Mujahideen, in fact, began in 1980 after the Soviet army invaded Afghanistan. But the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, you probably heard of Zbigniew Brzezinski, the author of the book called The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. I've got it somewhere in my library here. What he points out is that, in actual fact, the reality was completely different. Prior to the Soviet invasion in 1979, Jimmy Carter
I just
had
want
authorized $500 million.
Yusuf, I just want to interrupt you there. Look,
Yeah.
you're raising a very, very important point, because the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carter funded what they called the Mujahideen. I always battle to get my head around that word, Mujahideen. Now, surely after the failure of the Russians to actually tame Afghanistan, there was a lesson there for the Americans to be learnt. They've been sent packing as well now.
Absolutely. You know, there's a good book, which I'll probably, I don't know if you guys can see it, which I'll probably show to the camera. It's called The War on Freedom, How and Why America Was Attacked on September 11, 2001 by Nafiz Mossadegh Ahmed. He's for the Institute for Policy Research and Development. It's a good book. Right. What he points out in relation to your question, I don't know if you could see it here. It's on the cover. I've shown it to your screen.
Yep.
But what he points out, what he points out on that particular point, about the collapse of Afghanistan, what people need to know is quite important, is that in 1978 in Afghanistan, there was a coup. Afghanistan previously was under the rule of someone called Mohammed Dawood. The coup that took place in 1978 led to the bringing into power of a government called the PDPA. That's the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. Now, that was led by someone called Nur Mohammad Taraki. But that PDPA was very closely aligned to the Soviet Union. And the leader of the PDPA, essentially at that particular point in time, the PDPA, like the Soviet Union, was in fact to a large extent repressive. But at the same time, there were certain reforms that were implemented in Afghanistan. I mean, you had, for example, there was sort of a social security scheme that was introduced. There was, infrastructure that was being developed and so on and so forth. Now, coming back to your point about Russia, this government was allied to Russia. But coming back to your point on Russia, the general argument is that the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. But that's not actually what transpired. Prior to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the United States under Jimmy Carter and his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, they were authorizing approximately $500 million. Now, you're talking about 1979, $500 million. I mean, I don't know what the equivalent is in 2021. Back then, a lot of money. And what they did was that they helped set up and organize, because the Cold War and Afghanistan was closely aligned to the Soviet Union, they basically decided to lure these individuals from the madrasas and these outlying villages, who they called now the Mujahideen, and who were basically romanticized in the Rambo movie in the 80s. And what they did by funding this group of the Mujahideen, the goal was to lure Moscow, who were obviously troubled at what was happening in the Afghan region. And then, of course, you had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, obviously, that was a total demise of the Soviet Union. That eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So you can see that systematic pattern that happened over a period of 8 years. And for that period of 17 years, Washington had poured something like $4 to $5 billion into some of the most brutal men on earth. I mean, you look at one of them that comes to mind, a chap called Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. check up on Google who this character is if you can't get a book on his background. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, he was a warlord. He was particularly favored by the CIA. He received tens of millions of dollars long before bin Laden came onto the scene. And his speciality was, in fact, trafficking in opium. And 8 years earlier, prior to that, because in 1994 he agreed to stop attacking Kabul. 8 years earlier, you had the CIA director William Casey. He gave his backing to a plan put forth by the Pakistani intelligence agency to recruit people from around the world to join the so-called Afghan jihad in inverted commas. And over a period of 10 years, you had close to 100,000 militants who were trained via the Pakistani inter-services intelligence, which served as a conduit for the CIA and the American government, and of course what was happening on the ground by the in Afghanistan. And between 1986 and 1992, these camps were overseen by the CIA and MI6. The same British government and the same American government or the Europeans that are complaining about Afghan refugees having gone to Europe or having gone to the United Kingdom. I had a friend of mine from the UK complaining, so many Afghan refugees in London. But the MI6 and the CIA backed and supported some of the most brutal men on earth that brutalized the population in Afghanistan for a period of a decade. And they trained individuals. They trained individuals in the arts of bomb making, in black arts, and the same individuals that were trained by the CIA and MI6 with SAS training by the United Kingdom military, they became the future Al-Qaeda and the Taliban fighters in bomb making and the other black art operations.
So what you're saying in effect, Yusuf, hang on. What you're saying in effect is that the Taliban and all these nefarious groups actually got their military training from the American and the British, and now it's all turned bad.
Absolutely. In fact, there was a CIA camp in Virginia, States, where in the 80s, you had, for example, a training camp where the leaders were trained. In New York City, there was a front which was known by the CIA. It was called the Al-Khifa Afghan Refugee Center. It was covered by Mahmoud Mamdani, the Kenyan writer, in his book America, the Cold War, and in fact, I've got the book somewhere around me, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, America, the Cold War, and the Roots of Terror. And what the Al-Khifa Afghan Refugee Center was a front which was, on face value, trying to support the will of Afghan refugees, but behind the scenes was a conduit used by the CIA to can be paid by the American government in a clandestine fashion to go back to Afghanistan and fight against the Soviets. This was called Operation Cyclone. And in fact, Operation Cyclone began before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and in fact continued long after the Soviets had withdrawn in 1989. And the point being made, if you look at some of these people that were behind this, they in fact wrote this in books. Brzezinski, who's now late, but he was the advisor to several presidents, the American Tsar, as they called him. Get his book, The Grand Chessboard. It's called American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. He writes in that book, which is after having been fully involved in Afghanistan under the Carter administration, that the key to dominating the world is to dominate Central Asia. And so by strategically positioning the mightiest government in the world, the United States, between competing powers and immense levels of oil and gas wealth, that in fact is one of what he describes as the grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy. You couldn't make this up. You absolutely could not make this up. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed, then eventually what had happened was that chessboard essentially passed to the Clinton administration. And so under the Clinton administration, you had the mutation of the Mujahideen, where they became known as the Taliban. and then they began to rule Afghanistan. And the relationship was a good one. Let me tell the viewers out there, and Scott, you'd probably know this as well. The relationship between the United States and the Taliban at the initial stages was very good. In fact, if you go back to 1997, some 4 or 5 years before 9/11, the U.S. State Department officials, and you can even check these videos on YouTube, the executives of Unocal, which is the Union Oil Company of California, they, together with U.S. Department officials, and some argue, even Clinton himself was present at many of these meetings in Washington, in Houston, in Texas. These individuals, the Taliban, they were entertained lavishly. They were taken to the Kennedy Space Station in Florida. They were taken to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. And they were welcomed. And despite the fact that at that stage, it was fully aware that they were involved in persecution of their particular communities, the human rights violations was well known. When one of the State Department officials was asked about what about the human rights violations that are going on in Afghanistan, he said, well, we can live with that. So the American goal at that stage in the 90s actually failed, was the so-called dream of pipeline. And this pipeline would obviously run from the Caspian base. There's the Caspian Sea. There's the Soviet Caspian, formerly the Soviet Caspian base across Afghanistan to a deep water port. And the Taliban were offered about something like 15 cents for every 1,000 cubic feet of gas that passed through Afghanistan. And the oil companies were going to make billions. There were 3 members of the oil companies. They were soon going to be of the Bush presidency. There was Dick Cheney. He had represented 9 oil companies. There was the later National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. She was a director of Chevron, Texaco, that had a special responsibility of Pakistan and Central Asia. And then Bush Sr. himself, he had his own company, the Carlyle Group. And the Carlyle Group, had about 164 companies that specialize in oil and gas. And some of their clients include the bin Laden family themselves. So all the setting up that was happening in the 90s and this meeting with the Taliban was going to make people a hell of a lot of money. And the pipeline dream faded when you had the embassies that were bombed in East Africa and Kenya in 1996. And then Al-Qaeda was blamed, and then the connection with Afghanistan was made. And so from that particular point of view, it's an embarrassment to the United States government that these individuals now were becoming more of a liability. One of the individuals linked to them, Osama bin Laden, was needed to be got rid of. And so they had to destroy the Taliban and put forth a more compliant government for them to go ahead and then get the pipeline going ahead, which they did under the invasion in 2003. And, of course, the establishment of the bases.
Now, Yusuf, you raised a really interesting point that people watching need to understand. And that is the fact that agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency in the US is not run for the people, it's run for big business. That's its goal, is to run for big business. It's not an American organization. It's part of the New World Order. And you've brought up some names like Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, George Bush. The Bush family, for example, George Bush Sr. is one of 12 people in the world who can actually create money out of fresh air. He has the ability to literally sign a document and create $1 trillion. There are only 12 people in the world who have that authority or that ability. And his father, Prescott Bush, funded the Nazis, funded Adolf Hitler in a big way. And people need to understand that what's going on around the world today, these people, they're evil, and they're far more evil than people like the Taliban. The way the history has been rewritten, for example, from World War II, where nothing is ever mentioned about the funding of Adolf Hitler by right up to the Bank of International Settlements, all the way down, the ladder, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Bushes, all these big, the Wall Street mob, they were all behind funding Germany. It had nothing to do with patriotism. It had nothing to do with being morally right. It was all about money. And that's what's driving the world today. And just talking about the CIA, Yusuf, you touched on opium. Now, Afghanistan's biggest trade is opium. Why was that allowed to flourish the whole time you had the U.S. military in there? Surely that would be the first thing they'd want to take out.
You know, the good book for those, I'm going to go into this, but I want to introduce this book, which I picked up a couple of years ago by Gresham Peters. She's a fantastic writer. It's called Seeds of Terror. Seeds of Terror. Your viewers can see it. Get a copy of the book from Amazon. You can purchase it from Amazon. Seeds of Terror by Gresham Peters. How heroin is bankrolling Taliban and Al Qaeda. Now, obviously, this was written a couple of years back, but what it does is that it will permanently reshape the way you think about the Taliban in Afghanistan and Al Qaeda, and it in fact is based on hundreds of interviews with Taliban fighters, with smugglers and law enforcement officials, and so on. Let me just give you a brief background to the entire thing. During the 1980s, the CIA was conducting a secret war against Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and obviously it helped transform the Afghan-Pakistani borderlands into a kind of a launch pad for the global heroin trade. In the tribal area, there's obviously no police force. There was no police force. There were no courts. There were no taxation. And what happens is that hashish and opium, for example, is openly on display. And so by then, the process of guerrilla mobilization to fight the Soviet occupation was long underway. And instead of forming its own coalition of resistance leaders, what the CIA did is that they relied on Pakistan's inter-service intelligence and the Afghan clients, who soon became key players in the global heroin trade. Now, just look at the facts here. Between 1979 and 1980, when the CIA was basically beginning to ramp up efforts for funding the Mujahideen, there was a network of heroin laboratories that opened on the Afghan-Pakistan frontier. And that region soon became the world's largest heroin producer. Now, get this clear. The level of heroin trade was not on that scale. I mean, obviously, people were smoking hashish and poppy seeds are growing. But with the CIA involvement in Afghanistan in the 70s, suddenly, by 1984, you had a situation that 60% of the US market and 80% of the world's global opium trade was coming from Afghanistan. I mean, this was totally unheard of, unseen of. It never happened before. And at this particular point in time, we'll come to the past, but at this particular point in time, as the US has already withdrawn from Afghanistan, it's over, the Taliban are in fact controlling the country, and the illegal drug trade continues to this particular day. Now, there was a period between 1997 and 2001 when Mullah Omar, who was the leader of the Taliban, in fact, to a certain extent, stopped the drug trade. And then, of course, it eventually continued. But at this particular juncture, despite the Taliban coming into control, according to the UN Drug Agency, Afghanistan is estimated to be responsible for around 80% of global opium and heroin supplies. There are surveys that state that the actual value of the opiate economy in 2017, 2018, 2019, you're looking at figures like $1.2 billion to $2.1 billion. Now, I mean, with that kind of money being generated, opium trade is not going to go away. If you look at the Afghanistan Opium Survey, they state that the area under opium poppy cultivation increased by up to approximately 40% in 2020. So the point being made, Scott, is that it would be destructive in a perverse kind of way, to the global American economy if the opium trade, in fact, goes into a total oblivion. You need to understand that Afghanistan has already got a long history of opium poppy. Between 1979 and 1989, you had a number of resistance leaders. They were engaging in the opium trade to finance the operations, regardless of the fact that, in Islam, it is regarded as haram. Any kind of intoxicant, whether you are engaged in alcohol, whether you're engaged in toxing, it's viewed as haram, in a manner of speaking, unlawful. And yet you had individuals like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the guy that I would call was a psychopath of total note. They doubled the opium trade by close to 500 to 600 metric tons between 1983 and 1982 and 1983. And at that time, the United States was fully aware of this. The United States government under Reagan was fully aware of this. The Carter administration knew the inevitability of this. The National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, knew what was going to happen. And what eventually happened is that the CIA, it's now established beyond doubt that the CIA, via the ISI, that was a Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, were actually helping smuggle opium out of Afghanistan into the streets of the United States in order to raise money for the Afghan resistance, and also into the Soviet Union in order to weaken it through drug addiction. So what they would do is that they would supply the Soviet Union with drugs, the CIA, and then, of course, they would finance the actual resistance. So they would smuggle the opium, according to one of the writers, Alfred McCoy. I believe Alfred McCoy has done a fantastic history on the CIA. The CIA directly supported many drug lords, and the reason for that is that that drug money was going to be funneled back into Afghanistan to finance the resistance against the Soviet Union, and the drugs would be thrown into the Soviet Union.
Just let me get this straight. Okay, so for the 20 years that America basically occupied Afghanistan, the drug trade in opiates and heroin has continued, and if anything, has grown. And the facilitator has been the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, which again is basically an arm of the New World Order. So while the mainstream fake news are suggesting that, it's terrible what's happening in Afghanistan, and they show an American soldier who's been shot, that's a complete distraction from the main game of what's been going on for the last 40, 50 years in Afghanistan. Please, over to you.
Yeah, no, most definitely, this is what's basically happening. What had happened subsequently is that there was a period of the Soviet period between 1979 and 1989 when that the drug production increased tenfold. Drugs always existed. Opium was and hashish and poppy seeds. There's a large production of that as it is, but it never reached the stage that it did in between the 70s and the 80s, where under the control of the CIA and the American military, it went through tenfold. It went through the actual roof. And what they did, strangely enough, is that to maximize the control of trafficking, strangely enough, an office was maintained in Iran. And Iran, obviously being Shiite, would have been opposed to the Mujahideen and those individuals who were involved in this particular trade. But another factor also was the eradication effort inside Pakistan, because the Pakistani government and the United States Agency for International Developments and other groups were initially involved in attempting to eliminate poppy cultivation from certain areas of the northwestern province, the area that's bordering Afghanistan. And then what that led is that opium industry shifted from Pakistan into Afghanistan during the 80s. And so that continued for a decade. And then, of course, you get the post-Soviet period that was between 1989 and 1994. That was a time when the Soviet army was totally destroyed. Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the United States then left the scene, and they created a power vacuum. And so what happened was that with this power vacuum created, various Mujahideen factions started fighting each other against each other for power. And so with the discontinuation of Western support, because now there's no longer support coming from the United States, they resorted to more poppy cultivation to finance their military existence. And then afterwards, in 1994, you get the Taliban, this particular faction that came into power, and they saw a kind of at that period there was a massive rise in opium crops, but interesting enough, but only as late as 1999, 2000, Mullah Omar, who at that stage was an ally of the US, but I mean he was a ghost figure. There was some degree of collaboration with the United Nations to eradicate heroin production in Afghanistan. So, you know, if you want to talk about one positive thing that the Taliban attempted to do, which is now factually admitted for the short period of time that there was there, despite all the other human rights violations that were taking place, was that there did appear to be a significant reduction in the area of opium poppy farming in the so-called Taliban control areas, because those areas were roughly about 3/4 of the world's supply of heroin at that particular time. So there was a purported ban that was put into effect, but that ban was only up until, I think, 2002. And then, of course, the invasion that took place, immediately after 9/11 of Afghanistan. But some parties and some people and some journalists have now suggested that during that particular ban, other parties may have benefited from the price increase during the ban, because some would argue that this was even some form of market manipulation on the part of certain drug lords, because what would happen is that due to the ban, then within Afghanistan, if you want to talk about a black market, so to speak, market manipulation could be then engaged in by certain drug lords. They could then store it, raise the prices significantly. And some argued that certain factions within the Taliban themselves were also involved in the drug trade, albeit even during the time of the 2000 ban. So, you know, there were factions probably within the Taliban and themselves were involved in the opium trade, even during the ban that was imposed by Mullah Omar. And then, of course, you had the Afghan war, that's the invasion, the US invasion that happened in 2002 after 9/11. And then afterwards, it was back to business. So one would have thought, at least, if people are talking about the fight of good and evil, one would have thought at least that, okay, now the United States has invaded the country, they've rid the world of the evil Taliban, as they claim,
and
then
poppies.
at least they should stop all the vices and all that's happening. But the opposite happened. The opposite happened. Then suddenly you had a total increase under Hamid Karzai when he was sworn as president in, I think, 2004, 2005, somewhere around that time. You had the levels of opium poppy cultivation exceeding to levels never before seen. And I think I sent you there was a graph. I don't have the graph before me in front of me. I think I may have sent it to you on your Skype. There was an article on France 24, which stated the fact that in 2006, when the Karzai government had just come into power, estimates were made by the United Nations. They have an office on drugs and crime that estimate that about 52%, and you're looking at 52% of Afghanistan's GDP, which was amounted to $3 billion at the very least, is generated purely and solely by the drug trade. And this is when American forces are inside Afghanistan. Now, they had so many bases that are there. The rise in production cannot be in any way attributed to the link or the deterioration in security situation, because security was at an all-time high by the United States military being present and, in fact, creating a dominant force. And the reality is that opium is more profitable than wheat. Opium is more profitable than sausages or biscuits. And destroying opium fields would obviously lead to a total discontent of even amongst the population. So for the United States, they knew full well that the opium trade had to continue. And so the largest supply of heroin and heroin addicts in the United States, in some way or the other, can be linked directly to the drug trafficking that is taking place under the auspices of the U.S. government for a considerable period of time. It happened in the 80s during the time of Mujahideen, and it went skyrocketed over the past 20 years.
Now, Yusuf,
Barack Obama, Bush,
Yusuf,
and Trump as well.
Yeah,
yes,
Yusuf, I just want to make the point that what we're actually saying here, and this is really to me the elephant in the room. What we're saying here is that when it comes to history, you're not getting the full story. In fact, what people get is a load of rubbish. I mentioned earlier about George or Prescott Bush's involvement with Nazi Germany and Wall Street's involvement. I'm going to show people watching a book called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and it's by Anthony C. Sutton. And I would suggest that anybody who wants proof that what you see in the mainstream media, you see these programs night after night where these horrible Nazis, look what they did to the Jews and stuff like that. I mean, that's a message that gets pumped out every single day. They never tell you in these documentaries that it was Wall Street that funded Nazi Germany. They never tell you that George Soros, in an interview, said that he used to go and take the possessions of the Jews, even though he was Jewish himself, because, and he says this in the interview, because if I hadn't done it, someone else would have. These are the people who are basically controlling the world today. They have absolutely no humanism or empathy or moral compass at all. They are complete psychopaths. And this is why I'm making this point, guys, that when we talk about what's happening in Afghanistan, and we've been talking about the puppy trade, you will never hear about that in the mainstream media. They'll talk about the Afghan woman who's been murdered by these terrible Taliban. Now, how many people in America have died directly as a result of heroin overdose, where it's come from Afghanistan, when the American soldiers in Afghanistan could have destroyed that production? So there's information that they put out there, and there's what is actually going on. And this point about the pipeline and the involvement of the Bushes and the Dick Cheneys and Condoleezza Rice. I always saw Dick Cheney in the Middle East, but because he had huge involvement in the fuel industry. He was a chairman of really big companies, and all of a sudden he becomes, I think it was Secretary of State. And he used to go around and
deputy president. He became deputy president.
Deputy president of the U.S. Now, this shows you how big business runs the country. And if we look at Joe Biden, we haven't touched on Joe Biden yet. His decision to move out of Afghanistan, as he did, went against the best advice of the Pentagon. In fact, the Pentagon are pissed off at the way that Joe Biden did it, where he just said, okay, we're getting out of there. And they left all the allies behind, the people that actually supported them. And they're now being hunted by the Taliban, apparently. What are your thoughts on that, Yusuf?
Yeah, look, just to end up on the issue, I'll come to Joe Biden, but just to end up on the issue of what you said about the heroin, which is an important point right now, and I'm talking about 20th of August, 2021, the Afghanistan harvest produces more than 90% of heroin globally and 95% of the European supply. And I want people to just put this in their minds, that there's more land that is being used for opium production in Afghanistan that was totally allowed by the American government than was actually used for coca cultivation in Latin America, which is obviously, from where you can get cocaine. In a sense, 93% of non-pharmaceutical grade opiates come from Afghanistan. I mean, this is absolutely shocking to the core. And the most powerful, beautiful land in the world, the land of the free, the United States totally allowed this. In fact, allowed it to flourish and allowed it to continue at a full reign. I think the one point is this on the Biden administration's plan to withdraw. That plan of withdrawal had what was already in place. I mean, it's probably the way they had entered Afghanistan in the first place was a total disaster and a total mistake. But what had happened is that during the peace agreement that had taken place last year, if you look at the 4-page document, you're going to tie up the U.S. State Department's website. And essentially, what the provisions of that deal, in fact, include is the total withdrawal of all American and NATO troops from Afghanistan. So they had planned this. They knew that this was going to basically happen. And Biden was just simply following the scripts.
Now, hang on, Yusuf, before you get onto that, I've just done a Google search, and I've come up with the CDC's own webpage. Now, we know the CDC is full of, well, I better not say it. Sorry, YouTube. I apologize. I'll be a good boy. I apologize. Okay. Now, the CDC's own webpage, and I'm going to put the link in the side chat so people can go and check this out. Nearly 841,000 people have died since 1999 from a drug overdose. In 2019, 70,630 drug overdose deaths occurred in the United States. And then it gives the causes. Opioids. Now that's what we're talking about. We're talking about opioids. Mainly synthetic opioids rather than methadone are currently the main driver for drug overdose deaths. 73% of opioid-involved overdose deaths involve synthetic opioids. Now, that's synthetic, but you still got another 27% of those deaths, which amounts to, I would say, a couple of 100,000 people directly from drugs brought across from Afghanistan. That's a huge number of people, and this trade has been protected by the U.S. military because they were occupying the place and they did nothing to stop them producing opium. What are your comments on that?
You know, the point being, it goes back to what I'd initially stated. The reality is that the Afghanistan Opium Survey, says that approximately the area under opium poppy cultivation increased by about 37% in 2020. The other point is this: is that a large proportion of Afghanistani people, in fact, rely upon the producing of opium. I mean, the reality, unfortunately, is that if you exterminate some of the poppy crops, that would not be seen as a viable option, because the sale of poppies constitutes the livelihood of many of Afghanistan's rural farmers. Now, poppies and poppy seeds by themselves are harmless, and some 3 million, I think about 3 million or 4 million Afghans are involved in cultivating these kind of poppies. Now, what you derive from those poppies are what actually leads to the actual destruction. The catch-22 situation here is that if they exterminate the poppy crops, then you're obviously going to have a situation that there could be a possible discontent or unrest amongst the indigent population, and
they'll get over it.
I think it's the way in which you do it, because some poppy eradication programs have in fact proven to be effective, especially in the northern region of Afghanistan. There were certain steps that were basically attempted to be done by one of the governors, but was totally unsuccessful in the long term. But the reality is that it's a kind of there's a schizophrenic relationship that's in place here, that you destroy one actually feeds off the other. opium production was in fact also protected by the government of Hamid Karzai. I mean, heavily protected by Karzai. Even though when he came to power, he made the claim that one of the aims of the government was to get rid of opium production. It was quite clear that he was complicit in it and fully aware of the fact that despite the idea that criminals were benefiting from opium production, the U.S. military were deliberately turning a blind eye to opium production, besides, of course, the fact that it was obviously aiding them and assisting them. And there have been allegations up to now that high-level members within the U.S. government and the European, there were a large number of people within the UK government were having direct drug trafficking links with what was going on in Afghanistan.
Now Yusuf,
this is something.
Yusuf, can you just excuse me a moment? I've just got an urgent message from Marlena in the side chat. I just want to have a quick look at that, see what's going on here.
Someone wants to join us. Someone wants to join us right now, Scott. I don't know if that's the same person.
Okay,
Someone can. He's an expert also in the region.
Okay,
He's been in the area before.
A man by the name of Salman Khan is going to send you Skype requests now. His Skype name is, okay, I see it, it's here, and he would like to join the conversation. He has an important info on Afghanistan in the Kar region. Okay,
so look, I know him personally.
Okay, let me just accept
him.
It's up
to you, Scott, but
let me just accept him, and then I'll just get him on. Okay, so hi. Sorry guys, we just got a fellow who wants to join us here. Okay, let me just see if I can now get him on. Okay, I'll add Salkan. Okay, there he is.
Salkan.
Okay.
_1, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here he comes. Okay. You better introduce me to Salkan because I don't know who he is. Yusuf?
Okay, I'll introduce you
okay.
to Salman Khan. Is he on? Is he on Skype?
Yeah,
well, Salman Khan, just for the
I'm calling him at the moment.
Audience and for yourself, I've interviewed him before. He's been an activist. He's a businessman in South Africa, but he's been an activist. He's been in Afghanistan and Pakistan and the Kashmiri region. He's an activist that is quite knowledgeable.
Because I don't know who he is. Okay, now Salkan, I can see you there. Can you join the conversation, please?
Is he on Skype?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. But can you turn down the live stream? I can hear it in the background. It's very disturbing.
Okay.
South Africa, but he's been an activist. He's been in Afghanistan and Pakistan and.
Okay, that's better. Now, Salkan, I don't see your video. I just see a little. I can hear you.
Solution, the perfect tool for any company size.
Okay, can you turn that off, please, Salkan?
Okay.
Okay, that's
sorry.
better.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, my camera is not is buffering, so it's every time I try to log on. But thank you very much for taking my my call.
Yeah. Now, hang on. I'm going to get Yusuf to introduce you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yusuf.
Okay. Yeah, Salman Khan is someone that I've met when I. My program, I beg to differ, some years back on ITV. He is extremely knowledgeable. He was an activist in relation to the issue of what the illegal Indian occupation of Kashmir and the human rights violations that were taking place. He's very much concerned on human rights violations in Southeast Asia, and from my interaction with him, he's quite clued up on the situation in the region, because I believe he's been to the region on many times, unlike many of us who sit in South Africa and just listen to what is happening and attempt to make our assessment. Salman has been in the region itself, and I would say without, he did initially ask me about being involved in the program. Unfortunately, he sent me a message pretty late, but I think he could give us his perspective on what is transpiring in Afghanistan and probably add more to the conversation. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, Salkan, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Scott?
I can, yes.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf, for brisk and my introduction, and thank you for the lovely program. I've been listening, and sorry I could not confirm it earlier because my friend passed away last night, so I was not 100% sure that I will be able to make it this evening. But thank you very much, Yusuf. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just add it on about myself. I've been on the Southeast Asia research for the last good 27 years, and I'm busy with my PhD on the region. And that is my area of the specialization, of course, the human right activism for the Kashmir, that you already have mentioned. I think the conversation that you're having is very, very good, and is very, I would say, parallel that you will not find in a mainstream media. And you have touched on very, very important points. But I think the most important part of the whole Afghan war, or the Russian invasion, and then to the American arrival in Afghanistan. Yes, there's definitely a part of a lot to do, not a lot to do. There is definitely element of the opium there. That's nobody can deny that, and that has not been because of the Afghan. It has been there because of the Chinese and the whole region, the Central Asian Republic. It's always been known for opium war. If you go into the history, you will find out about between the British and Chinese. They have fought many wars over the opium trade. But most importantly, the geopolitically, the Afghanistan, whoever, I think Yusuf did mention about something about the geopolitics. But let me rephrase. What is important, that why the so many empires have fought for the last 1,000 years, and for the last contemporary history, for the 40 years, the Russian has been there, the Allied forces has been there, and especially the US heavily invested into the war on terrorism. The geopolitics of the region is, if you look at the Afghanistan map, you will see that is compounded by 6 countries: Pakistan, China, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Iran. So they are the 6 countries which enclaved the total territory, and the biggest territory is 2,700 kilometers by Pakistan, the 900 kilometers with Iran, and a little bit of to China. And there is a Wakhan corridor, which is a small strip between, which divided Pakistan and Kashmir to the Tajikistan. Now, the reason, what is the most important thing that we need to understand, that why the Russian went. Yes, there was a civil war, and there was Americans was already interfering through the Wakhan corridor into the Southeast Asia, and especially into the Afghanistan. If you look at the map, and I will invite all the listeners and everybody else to have a look at the Afghanistan map and look at the geopolitical position of Afghanistan and also the Pakistan. The Russian come to, in 1979, into Afghanistan is not to just to, that was a transit. Coming to the Kabul from Russia, it was a transit. Because at the end of the Russian Empire, the last wish of Brezhnev, the President Brezhnev or General Brezhnev, was to just get one hot sea, because Russia is surrounded with all the cold and frozen sea. They wanted to get into the hot sea, and Kabul was a transit to Pakistan, and from Pakistan they wanted to connect themselves into the hot sea, and once they get into the hot sea, they will be ruling the whole world. That was the whole plan. But most importantly, if you look at the Afghanistan Kabul, and from Kabul corridor all the way to Gwadar, which is the deep city port of southern Pakistan, that is the most important point that I like to bring it to the attention of everybody listening to this program. If you get into the Pakistan from the Kabul, and then you base yourself at the Gwadar port, you are only 60 kilometers away from the Strait of the Strait of Hermus, which is the bottleneck between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, and that is the bottleneck called Strait of Hermus. 72% of the oil and petroleum production passes by from that corridor. And once the Russians get hold of that corridor, the American become redundant and American become non-existent, because American strength based on the power of energy. And if somebody can cut off their power energy through the petroleum, they are become completely redundant. So American realized that their motive is not to come to Afghanistan to help stabilize the government. It was basically en route to the Gwadar port. So Yusuf, you understand now what you was touching earlier. That's what exactly the geopolitics. So Scott, that is a very important. I don't have the map to show you, but anybody can open a map and see. Now hang on.
I just want to tell you, I've got the map of Afghanistan on the screen, and it's got
just
areas.
The Pakistan as well on the side, and
Yeah.
you will be able to pick it up straight away. What I'm talking about, the Strait of Hermus, which you will see between the Saudi Arabia, Russia, from Persian Gulf, the Iraq and Qatar, all the oil producing company, and there is a small corridor between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that's called Strait of Hermus, which is only 90 kilometers away from Pakistan port, and Russian wanted to actually cross over into that and block the oil supply. So American realized it. If this Russian proceed forward from Afghanistan, because once we establish in Afghanistan and Kabul, it is walk all over the Pakistan, because Pakistan was a very weak country compared to the Russian. So American come in place, and they provided the most lethal flying bird, F-16, against the Congress. This is the first time in the history of American history that the Pentagon authorized the supply of the one squadron, 40 aircraft, most lethal, fastest aircraft, agile aircraft. It was a big debate it was very big fallout between Israel and America, because Israel thought that will be a direct threat to the Israeli security if the Pakistan Air Force pilot get that planes. But they were given to them because the only way Pakistan can stop the Russian invasion into Pakistan is by the Air Force. So that America come into the place, and they provided all the military support. They provided all the training. And when we talk about the Taliban, we need to make a distinction between Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Taliban is an Arabic word which means Talib. And I will go into the history. I don't want to go into the origin of Taliban now, because I think Yusuf has been talking about it. But there's a distinction need to be driven between the two things. Taliban means Talib, a learner, a school teacher. School, somebody who go to the school means Talib, and Taliban is a plural word. Al-Qaeda is an Arabic word for a base. Like when you call it Qaeda, it means there is a base on the mountain, Al-Qaeda 1, Al-Qaeda 2, Al-Qaeda 2. So there's some military terminology, and that was glorification was given to Taliban. Now, what I want you to please keep in your mind, the word Taliban doesn't exist from the 1979 to all the way to 1994. The word Taliban, you cannot go into the Google and search for word Taliban. You will never find word Taliban associated to Afghanistan. It was coined by the CIA. It was glorified into the Time magazine and National Geography and everything else. I will tell you why it happened. Anyway, so American assisted as much as they could as a proxy war to make sure the block. Okay, now the Russia had two things. One, Yusuf, I think you done a lot of geopolitical study. There was two things. One, the time was they always wanted to get into the hot sea, but the timing was in 1979, the mid of the 1971. You remember the Imam Khomeini returning to Iran and the Irani Islamic Revolution, right?
Yes.
So the fear was if that Islamic Revolution spill over into the Afghanistan, which is also predominantly a Muslim country, that it is a very, very easy for that empire, a Persian empire, to get together with the Muslims and a very strong Muslim from Afghanistan, and they will penetrate into the Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and all the Russian Republic, and that will become a big problem. So the Russian wanted to block that spillover, one. Secondly, also they wanted to make a route into the Shatul Arab or Strait of Hermus. So American was there to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, when the American defeated indirectly Russians through the Afghans, they said their work is done. And in 1988, when the Russian was retreated, they left the whole of the Afghanistan with the arms. The way they done it today, they done it in 1988. They left Afghanistan without any support whatsoever, and they exploited the land, they exploited whatever they could have done, and they achieved the target, and they left the region without any political leadership. So what happened then? Between the time of 1988 and to 1994, the Iran took the advantage, and they start spreading through the Hikmatullah Yar, an engineer who fought the Afghan war. He supported the Iranian, and they start capturing one province after another province. Within a 4 year, the Saudis realize it, which is Saudis are Sunnis, and then they see the Shiite is going to take it over Afghanistan, which is very fragile. There is no political stability, and they're going to get into the Afghanistan, and then the Persian Empire or Shiitism will increase the size, and sooner they will be getting into the Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. All of the Central Asian Republic will be covered by the Shiitism. So Saudis and Americans, they get together and they say dollar for the dollar. American cannot see Iran get stronger into the Southeast Asia, and so does the Saudis doesn't want to see them. So they come and they say, what do we do? So they say, now we need to create a movement. And what was a movement? The people, those who were living on a border, there was a 3 million refugees was living on a border of Pakistan and Iran and Afghanistan. They said these young boys, his fathers are dead. There are more than over 300,000 refugee, 300,000 youth. Those are between the age of 12 to 20-year-old. They have no occupation. They are no education, whatever. They sit and they only learn about the Islam. So let's glorify them, give them a motorbike, give them a Ray-Ban glasses, give them a cars, give them ammunition, and tell them now you are Taliban and you are the lethal force. And they start training them to use them to push back Iran back into the Iranian territory. So that's where the birth of Taliban. And I want you to please go and Google. You will never find the word Taliban before the 1994. It was recoming back of that. Okay, now that is a Taliban. Al-Qaeda is the basis. Now, Osama bin Laden was also, because American what they done, they was recruiting the people from Sudan, from Nigeria, from all around the world, Muslims to come and join the Mujahideen and help their fellow Muslims. And I'm sure you see the videos that when the Brzezinski going and saying that that you are the God soldiers and you are the people who need to go back and fight Afghanistan. So they were actually paying $5,000 per soldier, and of course they were bankrolling whatever they could to make sure the Russian should get disintegrated. And what happened eventually, the Russians was, and they provided the Stinger missile. A Stinger missile costs you $17,000, and each Stinger missile was used against $55 million onto the Russian aircraft or the Russian helicopter. So every time the Stinger missile go and hit from the mountain of Afghanistan and take down one of the Russian helicopter, which was a $55 million US, because Russian could not use the terrain. So they were losing, and that was the reason that the Russian retreat, and then of course finally they disintegrated. Now I want to come back to the very important point. Russian retreat, the vacuum was gone, and then the Taliban took it over. Now that was the most important thing happened. Most important thing happened that we need to understand. The Bridas. I want you to Google and look at the word of a Bridas, B-R-I-D-A-S. Bridas. It is an Argentinian oil and petroleum company. His CEO, I think it was in 96, 97, he done the satellite geodynamic survey of the area, and he found out in the basin of Turkmenistan and a Caspian Sea, there is one of the biggest oil and petroleum reserve hidden, and nobody know about it. So he went there with the geological survey, and he went to the president Nazarbayev of Turkmenistan. He said, at your doorstep, you are sitting with a gold mine, and you got one of the biggest oil and gas, the resources available. He said, then what do I do? I don't have the resources. He said, now I'm going to raise the fund, and I'm going to actually do the drilling, but you sign a agreement, infinite agreement, that this will be my deal with you. He signed the agreement. If you can go and Google it, you will see the Turkmenistan and Bridas agreement. That was, I think, 95, 96. The biggest mistake the Carlos Bergulani, the CEO of the Bridas made, he invited Unicol, which Yusuf, you mentioned earlier very correctly, that the Californian oil company with the KBR was invited into the region to do the drilling and do some contract work. Once they get the sniff of the oil, untapped reserve of so many trillion of the cubic feet available in the region, they say, no, hold on a second. We can't be working with the Argentinian on one of the untapped biggest oil and gas reserve in the world. So they actually bypassed the contract, and they went to President Nazarbayev and they say, we don't want to continue. We don't want to honor this agreement. We want to work with you now. So he said, okay, fine. He signed another agreement with them. Now, the Carlos Bergulani, he sued Unicol in 1997 for $100 million. Please don't take my word. Go and Google this information and see. Unicol was Googled for $100 million in a Californian court, and they won the case. So the case was won. Now Unicol was under pressure, and now Unicol, along with the rest of all the faction, George Bush, and as you mentioned, Yusuf earlier, the Condoleezza Rice and all the people, they were working to convincing Taliban that you take certain percentage and let this pipeline from Turkmenistan to build into the Afghanistan and then to the Pakistan, 1,700 kilometer. And the Dick Cheney company was not coming into the action yet, but Anukul wanted to build. But the problem was the Taliban changed their mind. They say we're not going to get 15 cents per cubic meter or cubic feet of the gas and a petroleum per liter. We want $1. And that's where the fallout happened. And all of a sudden, when the fallout happened in 1999, then there was a big problem. And then of course, the Afghanistan woman under the burqa was a problem, and Hillary Clinton was lobbying. If you can go and Google, you will see all the things was happening. But then Taliban decided, no, we're going to go back with the Bridas and we will continue to build a pipeline. We want you to out. So they actually start getting them out of the Afghanistan.
So what you're saying, Salkin, what you're saying is that basically what's going on in Afghanistan is all about the oil.
100% correct. 100%.
Okay, now
you can Google all
gonna,
this thing. You can.
I'm just going to get Yusuf to just respond to what you've been saying.
Yeah.
Yusuf, do you want to talk about this company and the oil? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, if I could just get this out, I was listening to on my earphones. Yeah, in fact, he is correct. What had happened was that if I'm not, and I had done a bit of reading on this issue, is that in about 1998. 1999, Bridas, in fact, decided to take up UNACL in the United States, and I believe there was a case in Texas, and the Texan judge, and you must know that at that time one of the governors of Texas was George W. Bush, who was going to become president of the United States. The Texas judge dismissed there was a $15 billion lawsuit, I think $15 or $16 billion lawsuit against Bridas, which was the Argentinian oil company that Salman rightfully stated had got the contract to, engage in the necessary work in that particular region. And what had happened was that the claim against UNACL by Bridas was totally dismissed for preventing them from developing gas fields in that particular area in Turkmenistan. And the judge, in fact, stated, I think he made the point that dispute, in fact, was covered by Turkmen and Afghan law, not Texan law. So what the Texan judge was saying is that they've got no jurisdiction to deal with that particular dispute, notwithstanding the fact that UNACL was an American company and that, in fact, one of the members were future members of the United States administration. And so as a result of that, basically, this character, the CEO, I think his name is Carlos, that was the CEO of Bridas. He wanted to go to Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and all these other places for talks. And then apparently at some point, there was communication with Turkmenistan. The Turkmenistan's foreign minister met with Mullah Omar to discuss the pipeline deal. And there was apparently there was some attempt to revive that deal. And you had a delegation from the Taliban that had re-signed agreements with Turkmenistan to buy gas and electricity. And that was in the region of 1999, 2000. And then, of course, you got 9/11. And at that stage, obviously, the kind of relationship had become fractured between the Taliban and the United States. And then, of course, you get the invasion. So Salman is quite correctly, there's a good book on this, which maybe your viewers should get. I've got it in my library. I read it some years back. It's by Ahmed Rashid. It's an excellent study. It was published by Yale University. It's called Taliban, Militancy, Oil, and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. And I think, from what I recall, Ahmed Rashid goes detailed into this entire situation. The fact being made that this agreement that was subsequently entered into by the Taliban and in the Bridas, I would argue was one of the reasons insofar as the breakdown in relationship with regards to the United States government and, of course, the Taliban. Because initially, UNACL and expressed support for the Taliban takeover, because initially they were stating that it would make the pipeline project easier. That's what they were quoted as saying.
Okay.
And when this was brought to their attention by journalists after Bridas had in fact signed an agreement with the Taliban, UNOCAL then, when questioned about their initial remarks about their earlier relationship that they were attempting to build up with the Taliban, they then stated that they were misquoted.
Now, Yusuf,
so this is basically the situation that happened.
Yusuf,
because,
can I just interrupt at this stage? Just
sure.
For people watching, to bring this into context. Okay, now, if we look at South African history, in 1899, the British forces invaded the independent republics of the Free State and Transvaal because of gold on the Witwatersrand. That's the only reason they invaded. They can say whatever they like. They can make this sort of stuff up. They wanted to control the gold that was going to be mined on the Witwatersrand. That caused the Boer War. Now, what we're looking at here in Afghanistan is basically, and the same in Syria. If I can just mention Syria, the reason Syria is in such a mess now because the president of Syria refused to allow the US to put a pipeline through the country which would be fed into Europe. Now, the war in Syria was not about human rights. It was not about anything like that, just like the same in Iraq. It was all about big business in America using the US Defense Force for their own commercial aims. And it didn't matter how many people got killed with regards to getting that pipeline through Syria. Now, what we're talking about here in Afghanistan is basically the same thing. The US involvement there was all about facilitating big business to achieve aims. It had nothing to do with the people in Afghanistan and liberating them. But that is what the fake news say. This is where you've got to understand the difference between what is presented by the fake mainstream media and what is actually going on. And it all comes back to money and big business. Salih Khan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yusuf, for bringing all up to the speed. But I still maintain the Bridas won the 100 million suit against the Anacol. I do not know when it was overturned, but that is another discussion of another time. Very important point that I like to bring it to Scott. What you said. The media got the power to take a saint and turn into the monster, and take a monster and turn into the saint. So that's the power of a Western media. And who control the Western media? It's between the Rupert Murdoch and the O'Reilly. 90% of the world media controlled by these two giants. And whatever they say, that's what goes into the media. But
and can I just add to that, Salkin? Can I just add to that Reuters, which is the central distribution agency for news around the world, is controlled by the Rockefellers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, carry on.
The Rockefellers are the funder, but who is the funder of a Rockefeller is a Rothschild. Rothschild is a financier of a Rockefeller, and Rockefeller runs
all roads lead to Rome.
You know that all the routes. Anyway, coming back to the very important point. Coming back to the very, very important point. Now, what happened then? In 1999, that the Hillary Clinton was lobbying against the women need to be liberated of the Afghanistan, and the Taliban are the horrific people because they needed to create the case. And all of a sudden, conveniently, they staged what they call it the Twin Tower. After the Twin Tower, the the whole world was so insecure. Within hour, they didn't find the steel metal frame of the building was melted, but they find a Quran, and they find a pilot with a note in his pocket in a rebel that he was from Afghanistan. They find the evidence lead to the Osama bin Laden in a cave, while Osama bin Laden was already making appeal that if there is any evidence, I'm prepared to be arrested and take me not to United States of America, anywhere else. You can try me, but don't bomb Afghanistan. But the reason was not bombing Afghanistan or not the bombing or looking for a Taliban. They wanted a legitimate reason. You remember the rhetoric was set. The whole world was so fearful after watching the horrific scenes of Twin Tower going down that either you with us, you against us. The whole world saying no way with you. And then they got legitimate right overnight to move their armies against the wills of the world and civilian into the regions where they wanted to be. So now they got legitimate rights to be in Afghanistan, into the Arabian Sea, and to the anywhere they wanted to be. They start moving the forces because it was such a horrific incident happened, and still there is a jury out on the case. Actually, how it happened? Was it really happen, or was it staged? Now now you can see why it happened. Anyway, now they get into the Afghanistan under the pretext the war on terrorism. But now I want you to please Google Dick Cheney Company, who was the state secretary, Halliburton, and KBR and Dressler. The three of the company was given a contract to build that pipeline that we and Yusuf are talking about it. That pipeline is one of the biggest oil and petroleum pipelines. Start from the Caspian Sea basin, which is in the shore sea of the Turkmenistan to Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan to Kabul, and Kabul to Gwadar port to Pakistan. Now, that was a plan. 700-kilometer pipeline need to be built, and Afghanistan need to be turned into the completely Stone Age, and Taliban and all the people, those who they have actually trained, they need to be neutralized so they can have this pipeline, so they can have for another 200 years of the control of all the energy and oil supply. Now, that was a plan. Now, I want you to please go and have a look at the 2006, Google this name, called Journal Rolf Peter, RALPH, Rolf Peters. American journal is responsible for the Asian Republic as well as the Middle East. He have written a paper, and that was published in a U.S. military journal called Borders. Borders. He wanted to reconfigure the whole of the Middle East, and not he wanted to. That was actually a framework, and he put up the map that he wanted to divide what happening in Syria, the war. It was all designed in 2006. That was a strategic paper that he has presented and was published in U.S. military journal under the name of Blood Borders. Now, the Pakistan need to be carved out and need to be the two Pakistan. Pakistan, Balochistan need to be another separate state so they can have the pipeline passing by. They need to neutralize Saudi Arabia so they can have the holy city of Makkah and Medina left. Less need to be liberated. And what's happening in Syria and Iraq, that was all decided in 2006. Now, the game plan was to build a pipeline and move, but the resistance of the Taliban's was still there. Now, what happened is the Russian, who they draw back and they consolidated their forces as a Moscow, and Chinese are watching on the sideline very, very quietly and pragmatically. They definitely fought the proxy war back against the chase out, because American policy, if you look at it, if you look at the map, how conveniently they've been building a Air Force base to encircle China. You look at the Georgia, they put the Kazakhstan, they put it, Turkmenistan, they put it, Afghanistan, they put it. So they can see the Chinese been watching American. They are encircling and building the bases all around. So, and of course, in India, they build the bases. In the Indian Ocean, they're building the base. So Chinese was worried, but now the Chinese and Russian was collaborating. And of course, now the Taliban was being supported covertly by these forces to make sure that America cannot continue to be ruling into the area, and Americans continue to think that they will be able to win the war and they will be able to build a pipeline. And they created almost like a civil war in in the southern part of Pakistan between the Iran and Pakistan. There is a place called Balochistan, where it is almost like they created the civil war. But luckily, what happened is that between Pakistan and China, they quietly been building is called CPEC, One Belt and One Road Initiative, and that is called CPEC. CPEC is a China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is starting from their uppermost northwest province of China, and from there they connected from Karakoram into the very close to the Kashmir border into the Pakistan, and from Pakistan to the Gwadar port. President Musharraf, he leads the southern port of Pakistan into the hand of Chinese. Now, Americans, when they find out a few years ago, like 5-6 years ago, that road has been built and Chinese already set up the port, their dream was connecting the pipeline become redundant. they know that economically it is not going to be possible to fight the war so far away from a superpower like China into the region. So then they start looking at the other alternative, and of course from the Caspian Sea, I need to believe that they have built secretly a pipeline, underground pipeline in the Caspian Sea to connect to Georgia, which is an American base, and that pipeline plan was not completed. Now that CPEC, if you go and look at how strong the Chinese is called OBOR, which is a one belt, one road initiative, and they have built the network of the Silk Road and the CPEC corridor. For America to remain into the Afghanistan was making no financial sense, no military sense, and of course, on the same time, the Russian is also being not very happy for American presence at their doorstep. Chinese also not been happy. So America start looking at their economy when the Donald Trump come, who is a businessman. He is not a politician. He say, let's count our cost. Let's look at the expend. Where is the black hole of the economy? So he look at the Iraq. He pull out the army from there. He stopped that all the cash flow out. He stopped the Afghan war, and it was not the Joe Biden who decided. It was decided a few years back that this is what need to happen, and that the timetable was given. Joe Biden just need to follow what the instruction was given by the central or the American Congress.
You know what I love about what you just said, Salkan, is that we are seeing right now on the mainstream media why they're fake news, because the suggestion is that Trump was to blame because he actually started the withdrawal of American troops, and of course Biden was just carrying out the same thing. They never talk about the reasons why they pulled the troops out, which is because that project for big business in America was no longer viable. It had nothing to do with human rights. It had nothing to do with the Taliban. It was all about money. And that story
100%.
has been hidden from the population.
100%. You see, if you look at the what you call it, the university, I think it's called the Duke University in America. They done the whole the financial projection. It cost America over 20 years over 2.6 trillion US dollar. It was almost like 400 billion per annum. So they cannot continue to sustain 400 billion useless drainage of the money and the life cost of the soldiers dying every day in Afghanistan. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Trump is a businessman. He was a nationalist. Say whatever you want to say, but he fight against the trade war against China. He put the levies onto the import-export. He benefited American people in a way that he wanted to make sure that his economy is protected. So if you look at where is the wasteful expenditures are. He looked at the Syria war. He didn't want to get too interfered into that. He pulled back. He pulled back from the from Iraq, and of course he's from the Afghanistan. So it happened a few years back. Now, so that's why you can see the way they have left. The way they have left, they left in a bit of a hurry, and that is a very important. Now, another factor I want to bring it to your attention, that while the US was there, the Pakistan was on the border, which was used by the Americans as a base to launch the war into Afghanistan, and they fought against the Russian. Then, of course, when they were there between 2001 to until now, 2021, they were using Pakistani space and all this thing. But on the same time, Pakistan was saying because of that, there's a lot of cross-border terrorism coming to our country, and we just cannot continue to provide. And in that same time, for the last 8 or 9 years, India starts supporting 400 different projects in Afghanistan. There is only 3,000 Indians, but there is 27 Indian consulate in Afghanistan. Why Indian invested over 3.7 billion US dollar in the last 10 years? Because they wanted to fight a proxy war, and they wanted to replace America. Said, you don't have to be here. We will watch your affairs, and when you leave, we will be there. But of course, when American realized it, that the whole point of India setting up the bases and setting up these dams and setting up this telecommunication purely to fight a war into the Pakistan, did not look after the American interest. So now when Americans are leaving, Indian has to also run away, and Indian are saying that our investments are gone, which nobody know about it. If you go and look at the statement of the foreign minister, they say among our 400 project, 39 provinces, we touch every part of Afghanistan. So the reason I wanted to bring it to your attention, because India also been fighting a proxy war from the same region. Now, the geodynamics are very important. Geodynamics is that what we need to really look at it now. What is the future? We understand the history. We understand the geopolitics.
Salkan, can we come back to that in a second? I just want to get Yusuf's perspective on what you've just been saying. Yusuf?
Yeah, just quick on that point. I was listening on the headphones, listening quite interestingly. I think the point being made is that returning to power after a 20-year absence, what you find, the reality is this, and you look at the fact box, what are Afghanistan's actual untapped mineral resources? One of the former mines minister of the country stated that it could be in the region of up to $5 trillion. $5 trillion. Now, you look, what is the irony of the whole thing is that Afghanistan was one of the most impoverished countries on earth in terms of the human population. The
and
nation
nobody had,
was
can I just add, Yusuf, can I just add that nobody had any interest in Afghanistan at that stage? Please go ahead.
Nothing, but it was sitting on, an untapped resource of close to $3 trillion at this point in time. And there were estimates that were made earlier. There was a last commodity super cycle. I think there was something about in 2010. But obviously after the global economic recovery from the coronavirus, there were shock prices for everything from copper to lithium soaring. But the main point being made is, why is there such an interest? Why was there such an interest in Afghanistan? Why were there so many players going after this particular region? It was a region that was rich in resources like copper, gold, oil, gas, natural gas, uranium, bauxite, coal, for example, iron ore.
Lithium.
If you look at just on this key point, if you look at the key resource in Afghanistan, that was estimated by the country's mining ministry and indeed the U.S. government, the potential for monetary value was astronomical.
Yeah. Now,
and
Yusuf,
yet it was one of the most poorest countries in the world.
Yusuf, Dagbreker said Afghanistan is regarded as sitting on the largest deposits of lithium in the world, which is used in cell phones, laptops, and hybrid cars, rechargeable batteries for green energy, etc. And so just your thought on that.
The irony of that, I mean, you'd find in the poor townships and areas and villages, people don't even have a cell phone.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, for example, other copper, gold resources, I mean, they were slightly more modest, but I mean, in the region of about $200 million and so on. So you're basically sitting on, lithium, rare earths. The United States government knew this. They know
now,
this.
Hang on, Yusuf, I need to interrupt again, because I need people who are listening to this to understand one simple fact. When you hear people in the Senate, the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House saying, oh, look at this poor country, the human rights abusers and all this sort of stuff, they don't give one iota about that. All they are is just basically the mouthpiece, not for the people, but for the lobbyists, which represent big business in America. And most of these wars that we talk about where America gets involved, in fact, I'd say all of them, are not about humanitarian needs or whatever. They always put up a red herring. It's all about someone who's in big business who wants the army, the U.S. Army, to go in there and facilitate their project. That is actually what is going on. And when we're talking about that, I would just ask everybody to consider what we're all facing today around the world to do with a certain little virus. Consider when we talk about the fake news, like in Afghanistan, where they did this apparently for humanitarian needs. You've got to understand, guys, that the New World Order is already in control because it controls the media. Sorry, back to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, I was just making the last point to conclude that when you look at even the 2019 Mines Ministry report in Afghanistan, they estimated something like 1.5 million tons of rare earth minerals. That's unheard of. That's unheard of in any country, and yet this is one of the poorest countries in the world in terms of individuals and the lifestyle of people, and the destruction that was writ large and manifest for the past 20 years on this particular country. So this is an untapped region. I think what you're basically saying, Salman also wrapped this up quite decently when he pointed out, and that you had, of course, primary individuals involved in big business that were using this as a kind of a tool and a ploy, like an elastic band, to being pulled in different directions. And of course, the powerful players at the end of the day basically get into control. And I think you made the telling point. This has never been about human rights. It's never about humanitarian rights. When the Taliban were on good terms with the United States during the Clinton administration, the aspect about women being kept in a burqa or stoning or whatever the case is, or human rights violation, that was never the case. Just like in during the time of the sponsoring of groups like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, despite the atrocities that they were committing at the earlier stages, the eventual genocide that engulfed Cambodia, that was never the concern of the British government. And you talk about incidents like Year Zero, and so the same thing is here. It's never invasion is never about human rights. And I made the point, the United States invasion into Afghanistan was for a particular reason. It was a disaster. The 20 years was a disaster, and I'm talking about the Afghan people. And of course, the way that they were basically removed and ran away like beaten dogs with the tail between their legs at the end of the day, after having expended something like $1 trillion of wastage. Imagine what $1 trillion could have done for their own economy. Forget the rest of the world.
There wouldn't be one homeless person. Hang on, Yusuf. To put that in context, there wouldn't be one homeless person in America. They would all have homes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And I think this is where the deception comes in. This is where the deception comes in. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is the point being made. Is that people the writing was on the wall for many years. Once you had a situation once upon a time where one of the State Department officials in the United States administration, in a private briefing, they in fact even made the point that Afghanistan would hopefully one day become an oil protectorate, even better than Saudi Arabia. And then it was pointed out to him that in certain parts of Saudi Arabia, there was no democracy, or there was persecution of political dissidents and violation of human rights. What do you have to say about that? And the response was that we can live with that. So it's never about human rights.
Yeah.
It's never about the rights of people. It's always about the rights and the interests of the conglomerates, of the corporate cartel.
It's about greed.
Basically corporate fascism at the total level.
It's about greed and power. Now, guys, we've been going for well over an hour and a half. I want to wrap this live stream up at 10 p.m. So we've got about 20 minutes. So, Salkan, I'm going to ask you, and I'll ask you to keep your answers brief. Now, one of the ramifications of what's happened in the last few weeks in Afghanistan is that a huge amount of very technology advanced weapons are now in the hands of so-called terrorists, the Taliban, which is because the Afghan army just disappeared in fresh air. That's one point. And the second point, and I think another elephant in the room, is what is the relationship between Iran and Afghanistan now? Because is there a possibility the Taliban, with all these US weapons, could say, hey, Iran's always been a bit hostile towards us, we're now going to attack Iran? Salcom, if you'd like to just take that off first, then I'll get Yusuf to speak.
Great.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I will be very brief. I know the time is, and maybe we can have a follow-up program some other time. What is very important, we need to understand that I was about to say, and then I think you gone to the Yusuf. We need to understand the ethnic composition of Afghanistan, and that is the biggest issue that people do not understand. One, the Afghanistan, why US, what the mistake was made by the US for the last 20 years. They went for the minority. They imported the people from, they call it Northern Alliance. And that Northern Alliance are the regnate of a KGB or a Russian republics. Those was working for KGB. They were imported to come and fight the war. They were hired to fight a war like a soldier of fortune for the last 20 years. So if American could have built a real relationship with the Afghan people, those 45% of the Afghan are Pashtun, like a Zulus in South Africa. So they were neglected, and those are the Taliban. Now, so America went for Northern Alliance, which is the Uzbek, Tajikistan, and the Turkmenistan and the other people. They were brought as a fortune of fortune, and their general, just before Taliban took over the Kabul, 3 days before, General Dostum and Amanullah Khan, they fled overnight into the Uzbekistan, and they left their army unattached and uncompromised into the hands of Taliban. So we need to understand that there are a lot of what you call it ethnic diversity within Afghanistan. So the biggest group is Pashtun. The second biggest group is Hazaras. Then you have Uzbeks and Turks people. So there are the small pockets. Those are now the geo-religious dynamics. 90% of the Afghan people are Sunni, and 8% of them are Shias, and the 2% between the Sikhs, Christians, and Zoroastrian and other people. Now, the Sunnis are the people, those who live in peacefully. Now, today is a very big, we call it Ashura, that is very much like a Shias, the holy day, and it's for the Muslims. And the Taliban has emerged and evolved as from the warrior outfit, or the people call them a terrorist. And of course, Nelson Mandela was once called a terrorist. The Taliban are not terrorists. They was forced as an orphanage child to become a soldier, and they had no education. But for the last 20 years, they have grown up and they understand. They no longer study only the things of the religious value. They also learn about the geopolitics. They also learn about the international affairs. Today, you can see the maturity of the Taliban. When they come on, they offer amnesty to everybody. They didn't attack. There was not even a one person was shot. All these things we'll be watching on a video, it could be a fake news, as you earlier mentioned. So their relationship with Iran is very good at the moment, because today most of the Sunni Taliban went to the places of a worship of a Shias, and there was a part of their celebrations or the part of a commemoration of Ashura today. So they're very matured output. Now, we're talking about the ammunition. Now, I want to explain to you something. The Afghanistan, for the last thousands of the years, it's been a warrior nation. And I'll tell you something, you will be completely shocked. That when the child born in Afghanistan, in also part of Pakistan, which is like, the Northwest Province, we call it, the father or grandfather or the grandmother come, they don't come with a soft toys or a thumbs up or a small toy in a hand. They come with a gun as a present, because that's my boy or girl is born, whether it's a girl or boy, the gun is a gift. And the first thing the boy play or girl play is a hand, what you call it, a string. The ammunition is their jewelry. They're very responsible how to use it. So it is not that it fell into the hand of terrorists. I will take exception to that. The people, those who've been exploited for the 40 years, we cannot call them a terrorist, because Americans have a power to change anybody, like Nelson Mandela once was called terrorists. They're not terrorists. They fight a guerrilla warfare against the illegal occupation of their land. So they are not terrorists. They are mature. They were wild. Now they are very mature. As you can see, their statements are coming. They're offering an amnesty, and they're offering international relation. They're saying, please come back and help us. We want to build up everything. And all the arms and ammunition has been left behind irresponsibly by the living forces. They thought, if suppose we're not there, at least there will be a civil war, because the Afghan 300,000 the army at the cost of American taxpayer, $4.5 billion was invested to train them for the last 3 years. Not even a one soldier fight against them. Why? Because they also are one. They are also being exploited. They had no jobs, so they took American jobs. So when they were leaving, it tells you the people have welcomed the soldier of Afghan army. Those was trained by the US and the MI6 and CIA. They didn't resist to the Taliban. They said, you know what? We are your fellow citizens. We are your fellow brothers. Let's work together to build our country. And they say, we're not going to fight against you. So they surrender. So I don't think so. The world should be worried about Taliban having a dangerous weapon in their hand. They are in a mode of building the country. They learn from the mistake. They are passive people. And I'm inviting you, all of you, to please go and Google Yvonne Ridley. I met her in Johannesburg when she was visiting 4 years ago. She met first time one of the Guantanamo Bay prisoner, Ambassador Zaif. They met first time. Yvonne Ridley went as an undercover spy, as a journalist into Afghanistan, and then she was caught by the Taliban, and then she was taken and put into the jail for 11 days. And she issued the videos. It was on, and you can go check Yvonne Ridley. Now, when she was caught, she was put, and then when she was put into the jail, every morning she was given a breakfast, and she don't eat. So one morning, the third morning, this gentleman by the name of Ambassador Zaif, he knocked the door. He said, if you are decently dressed, please, can I come in? She said, yes, come in. As he walked into with a tray with the tea and coffee and the biscuit for a breakfast, she thought, this is my last day because these people killing people and I'm going to be dead. So she took a cup of, the cup from the hand and thrown his face. So he's 6 feet tall and he looked at her. He said, my sister, why are you so angry? We find you don't have a passport. We just want you not to be angry with us. Tell us where you're from so we can send you back to your country. And she think, nah, he's playing a game with me. He's going to kill me. She went to Pakistan, and from there she went to Scotland. And today within 6 months, she turned Muslim. And she's the biggest advocate of a Taliban. She said, I was not even touch one finger on me as a white female with a blonde hair by these Afghan jailers. And the Afghanis people, they were so sweet to me. They look after me, they clothe me, and they put me back. So these Afghan people are very hospitable people. They are not vicious as has been portrayed. They are matured. Yes, they were wild. They were angry. They were upset. They were illiterate because they were the orphans of the war, because their father died between the Russian war. So they were left onto the mountains, into the refugee camps. I went to the refugee camp. I see them. The poor people was living on a border. There was nothing for them. There was no schooling. But after the 20 or 30 years of the civil war, they become very mature, and you can see into the international media, they're conducting themselves as a gentleman, and they want to really need a help of the world to rebuild their country so they can live peacefully. Because for the 40 years, Russian exploit them, the American exploit them, the European exploit. I want to make one small point. I'm taking more time than I'm supposed to take. Is today what is very important, Scott, I think you will back me up. The United Nations is very Eurocentric. It's very Islamophobic. It is a vanguard of a Western agenda. Today, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, say, I'm very concerned about the human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. I say, go to hell. Why? Because you are the same person who can protect the life of the innocent civilian in Kashmir, where 100,000 people have been killed, where the women have been raped by the Indian army on a daily basis. There is 300 women who was raped in a one night in front of their sister and brothers and mother, the whole area. He never make one statement. There is a human rights crisis in India into the Kashmir. 14 million people have been jailed. Same United Nations issue the warrant of arrest through the ICCG to arrest Umar bin al-Bashir because of the war crime. But there is same court has never issued a war crime case against the Tony Blair, George Bush, or anybody else. It is the same United Nations, Scott, which issued a 7 resolution to bomb. How many people was killed in Libya? 12 people was killed by the Gaddafi, and he was bombed, he was killed, and he was finished, completely finished.
Well, look,
Saddam Hussein was put down because of the United Nations. So same United Nations, I'm trying.
Yusuf, before you start, I would like to ask you a totally different question, because I think Salkin really got the facts out there for us. The question I want to ask you in wrapping up this live stream is, What about the violent ISIS groups in northern Mozambique and reports of ISIS training camps along the south coast of KZN? Do you think, as suggested by the mainstream media, that those groups might be trained in Afghanistan and then come and cause trouble in South Africa?
No, absolutely not. I think one of the problems that people make, and by the way, I live in the South Coast, and I know who exactly you're talking about, and I've had personal interactions with these so-called ISIS types here in South Africa in terms of even personal interactions with them, somewhat hostile. In fact, if you look at it firstly from an ideological point of view, the Taliban and ISIS would be diametrically opposed to each other, at least from an ideological point of view. ISIS, even from the Taliban's point of view, would be viewed as a total aberration because the agenda that it follows, it claims to be somewhat neo-Salafist, whereas the Taliban, in fact, besides being more conservative and coming from the Deobandi school of thought and their particular culture of Pashtunwali and many ideas, ISIS is a totally extremist faction and is an aberration that has never been seen in an Islamic world before. In fact, the closest would probably be what we would describe, historically speaking, as the Khawarij. And the Khawarij, or the Kharijites, you can check it up on Google as well, were an extremist faction that were viewed even within mainstream Islamic scholarship in the earlier period as totally outside the fold of Islam. So I very much doubt that there would be any nexus whatsoever between the Taliban and the ISIS whatsoever in relation to what has happened. Pertaining to what's going on in Mozambique, and I think we did the discussion some months back, I believe you and I, on what's going on in Capo Delgado. Again, clearly there's a undiscovered or untapped oil and gas reserves that have been discovered. And not surprisingly, you've got the United States, again, in that particular region. And not surprisingly, you've got ISIS. But I do believe that there are extremist factions that are operating within the South African region. These individuals are not representative of the Muslim majority, nor, in fact, are they, in fact, representative of Islam. And I do believe that a lot of them are dangerous. I've had personal interactions with some of them. I've had personal conflicts with some of these individuals. And on a one-to-one basis, I can also point out, and I brought this to your attention in the past, even based on classified reports, which I'm not entirely entitled to disclose, is that these same individuals have had a nexus and built up relationships with individuals within criminal circles in the township localities and elsewhere. So I doubt that there's, I think people sometimes make the wrong conclusion that, for example, they lump up all these groups, whether it's Ikhwan al-Muslimin or Hezbollah or ISIS, or, for example, the Taliban as in one particular camp, when the truth could not be further. I mean, if you look, for example, at Hezbollah in Lebanon, I've got a Christian friend of mine who's at one of the gyms that I train at, and he's Lebanese, by the way. He's Christian. He would tell you that even amongst the Christians in Lebanon, they support Hezbollah because Hezbollah was a faction which opposed ISIS. ISIS would never dare to enter Lebanon because of the presence of Hezbollah. And similarly, the Taliban, I think they've made Salman was correct. There seems to have been an evolution. I hope, I'm generally, unlike Salman, I'm somewhat more pessimistic, but I'm hoping to be optimistic. The group is attempting to present a more moderate face, and it has made promises. It's basically claimed, the leadership has claimed that it assures all its citizens that it will protect their life, property, the honor. It has made the claim that it attempts to create a peaceful, secure environment. And it also goes on to state that all those who previously worked and helped Western troops and are now standing in the ranks of the previous administration, they are being totally accepted. Schoolgirls are going to be totally accepted. I know you've pointed out to me the initial report that was made on Sky News, and I posted it in one of my groups, and people have questioned that particular report. I hope it's not true. If it is true, it is disturbing.
I've actually seen the entire video uncensored, and it's.
I would like to see. I'd like to see the whole video. I'd like to see the whole video, and certainly speak out against it if it's necessary. If it's unnecessary, but at least at face value, what is positive is that this group is is speaking about the fact that they don't want to take anyone's private property. They don't want to take anyone's land, houses, not enter into anyone's markets and shops. And they are talking about, at the very least, talking about protecting the lives and properties of the nation as a primary responsibility. It may seem to be that the Taliban that we've got today is not the same Taliban that you saw in 1996 to 2001. It seems to be totally different from what at least it appears at face value. And let's hope it's better. Let's hope it's an egalitarian society, because Afghans have suffered for 40 years. They've suffered and languished in degradation and misery and war and war and war, war after war after war, with each and different factions heading and attempting to amass power for itself. And maybe they need something better for themselves. So let's hope that this new Taliban that comes into power, whoever they are and whatever they're espoused to claim, in fact, create a more egalitarian society, because this has been a nation that has suffered for decades upon decades.
Right.
Yes.
Now, look, guys.
Hang
on, Salkin. I just want to make a point here, and that point is that what has really come home to me from listening to you guys talk is the fact that it was big business that was behind, and it had nothing to do with what happened on 9/11. Big business was behind the entry of the US forces into Afghanistan in particular, because obviously the red herring of 9/11 was a perfect way of saying, okay, we're going to respond by stopping the terrorists. But it was all about the precious resources, including oil, gas, etc., in Afghanistan. And I think the point that you made, Salkin, that came home so clearly was the fact that once China from the other side had gained access to those resources, it became too hard for the Americans. So they said, okay, we're going to drop Afghanistan. We're getting out of here. And it had nothing to do with terrorism. It had nothing to do with human rights. It had everything to do with the New World Order and big business. And just, am I correct in my assumption there, Salkin?
Yes, I think you are. You said, and you come very close to say something further, and let me fill that one. They said when the Chinese come and they find no more financial viability or project to be continued, they come out. Americans, or let's say New World Orders, because it's not America only, there's a New World Order. When they're coming out, and I want to answer you just quickly, I will not take more than a half a minute, or let's say 2 minutes maximum.
Okay, go.
You asked a very important question. You used to ask about ISIS in Mozambique. Now, let me ask you something. If the ISIS is such a formidable Muslim extremist mixed outfit, let's say militia outfit, and I'll say to the Yusuf is exactly the same thing I've been asking people. They emerge under the nose of America, one of the biggest military bases in Iraq. They are one of the biggest military telecommunication, you can name it. They were there for 20 odd years. How come it can happen that they have a far more superior telecommunication power and they become such a lethal force under the nose of America when they were in Afghanistan, in Iraq? One. Secondly, if you hypothetically look at it, the biggest enemy, let's say per se, of any Muslim outfit is Israel. Now, the ISIS managed to launch a war in Afghanistan, 7,000 kilometers away, into South Africa, in Kenya, but they have never attacked Israel. So I ask a question, who is behind it? Who generated it? Because we know Taliban was generated by somebody, right? I think now this ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, it is a lost battleground is Africa. I am sorry, but I want to leave a food for thought that when these forces of Allied and the New World Order, under the pretext of war on terrorism, whatever the case is, they're moving out from the one theater, they're definitely opening the next door. And next door is our continent, because they already have started a pretext of what happened, a terrorist attack in Mozambique, and it should be an eye-opener, because for the 10 years ago, they have put a African base, is called AFCON, and that's is in Djibouti. And Djibouti, they have set the base. Now the Africa with the last natural resources, with the diamond and gold and platinum and lithium and everything else, you will see the new outfits like Al-Shabaab and then Boko Haram and ISIS coming into the Africa, because then the Uncle Sam will be coming and saying, oh, you got a terrorist problem, we are ready to help you. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Watch the word, and that's exactly what is going to happen.
I hear what
they
you're
are
saying.
Themselves from Afghanistan, but the next stop is here, next door to us.
Yeah.
We need to be very mindful of it, and we need to be well educated. We shouldn't be lured into that the Muslims is always going to be the Muslim terrorist scapegoat. Let's use them and create a lethal force and show them
Salkan,
they are the evil.
I get you. I get what you're saying. Yeah, but that was well over 2 minutes. Now, I just want to, I just want to wrap. Look, I really appreciate your input, and I'm so pleased you joined us tonight. I just want to say that it's fascinating, and it's so important that people understand that this so-called human rights that they're pushing for in America is a load of bullcrap. The big business are basically mercenary. They don't matter. They don't care who dies. They don't care the age of the person who dies. That they are just about power. That's all they're interested in. Think about it, because remember, Carl Schwab says by 2030, you will own nothing, but you will be happy. And he is the central force of the New World Order. Now, I want to thank Yusuf once again for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Yusuf. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
It's a pleasure being with you again, Scotty.
And I just want to say thank you to Salkan too. Look, we could have talked about this for hours, but after 2 hours, look, people, they lose interest. So I think we covered the key points. And I'm going to wrap this up now. I just want to thank the moderators for looking after the side chat. I see we did have a couple of trolls, and I saw Dan was saying, how do I do that? How do I hide a troll? Well, I think, Dan, just send me an email and I will show you how to hide a troll in the side chat. All right, and thank you for everybody who's joined us tonight. We have interesting discussions most nights here on Loving Life. And tomorrow night, I'm going to be talking to General Isaac van Zyl. Now, Isaac is the head of the Boerelegioen, and we're going to be talking about the concerns about a planned insurrection in South Africa this Monday, the 23rd of August. Now, it might just be a lot of protests. We don't know what level it's going to be at. But I just have to say to you, Yusuf, and to you, Salkan, that the Indian population in Durban in particular, and those guys in Phoenix, I take my hat off to them, because they protected their community. And the way the media have presented it, this is again the fake news have presented it, is that it was a racist action. It had nothing to do with race. It had to do with protecting our own community. And that's the truth, which once again has been totally been misrepresented by people like Enka, SABC, same old suspects. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'm wrapping up now. Have a great evening, everybody. And Salkan, make sure that you keep in touch with Marlena so we can actually get you on again. And get your camera going.
Thank you very much.
Get your camera going. All right, guys, take care. And I'll leave the side chat open for a few minutes for people to say their goodbyes. Cheers, Yusuf. Cheers, Salkan.
Thank